Stand-up comedy is the personification of science.
Thank you. Good night. My name is Harold Bay.
Hello, my name is Dr. Harold Bays, Medical Director and President of the Louisville Metabolic and Atherosclerosis Research Center located in Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome to this series of YouTube videos examining the science of stand-up. In this YouTube video, we're going to be talking about definitions. Definitions essential to understanding stand-up comedy. This series of YouTube videos are examining an array of the sciences that are applicable to stand-up comedy. So let's start with some of the basics. What is a stand-up comic? A stand-up comic is a person with a microphone and a live audience and delivering the funny. Okay? That's the essence of a stand-up comedy. What is a comedienne or a comedian? Well, we used to use these terms, like comedienne was a woman, a comedian was a man, but I don't think people use those terms very much anymore. It's analogous to actress versus actor. I don't see too many people using the word actress anymore. I think most people, you're a man or a woman, or whatever gender, you're a stand-up comic. I think that's the best generic term. What's a comedic actor? A comedic actor is someone who's an actor in a funny television show or a movie or a stage. And that's very different than a stand-up comic. I was watching a news show once where some president had been elected and the person doing the interview on the TV went to these comedic actors. They were actors in a situation comedy, a TV situation comedy, and this commentator said, oh, well, you know, with this person being elected president, I bet they're going to give you a lot of new material. And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. Okay, folks, big difference between comedic actor and a stand-up comic. Not the same, totally different. Humorist uses comedy in public speaking or writings, such as Mark Twain or Will Rogers or Bill Cosby. Look, I know Bill Cosby's done some things he ought not do and ought not have done, and he's paying for it. But don't underestimate the influence that Bill Cosby had on comedy and how many successful comics started out by listening to his albums. Prop comic. What's a prop comic? Prop comic is a comic who relies on objects such as instruments or puppets or magic. It's essentially stage stuff. Okay? The thing you need to know about this is that there is a hierarchy or a prioritization of the comedy purist towards people who just have a person and a microphone and a stand. So sometimes prop comic is used as a pejorative. Another thing is, I remember I was in the green room. We'll talk about that here in a minute. I was in the green room getting ready to hit the stage at a stand-up comedy job, and I noticed they have all these pictures, former comics, and they sign their picture and they put them in little frames on the walls, and I saw this one picture and it said, "Not just another ventriloquist." And I turned around to the other comic and I said, "You know what that means, don't you?" He goes, "No, what?" I said, "Just another ventriloquist." Now, that's sort of mean, and I'm sure there are variances in ventriloquists. I used to do a guitar bit, and I know there's variances in people who do guitar bits and such, but my point is, sometimes the term prop comic isn't a compliment.
And finally, what would it have been like if Bob Dylan had become the lead singer to Devo? There's a look of fear on your face. Is that here? Bob Dylan, lead singer to Diva. Whoa, why don't you whip it? Whoa, whip it good. And it's better when you whip it. And you whip it like you should. So go forward, move ahead, try to detect it, not too late to whip it. I said whip it. Oh, I said whip it good. How does it feel to be whipped good? Thank you, Louisville. Good night.
Impressionist comic. This is a comic that imitates voices and mannerisms of celebrities or politicians. Very effective in stand-up comedy routines.
They had that debate with Al Gore. Did you see that? What a fascinating conversation that was, wasn't it? You like Al Gore? By applause. People out here like Al Gore. You like Al Gore? Really? I don't know, folks. I don't know. He's just a little too preachy for me. You know, he always thinks like he's above everybody. Like, you don't know near as many things as I do. People say he's boring because he doesn't have good speechwriters. Speechwriters doesn't have anything to do with it. You could give Al Gore one of the most controversial poems of all time and it would sound the same. Mr. Gore, could you please recite to us, I Am the Walrus, as written by the Beatles? I am he, as you are me, and you are we, and we are all together. Cuckoo, 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 cuckoo. Then we got Bill Clinton in office. By applause, how many people out here think Bill Clinton's doing a wonderful job? By applause. How many people out here think he could use a little work? By applause. How many people out here think he could understand the working person a little bit better if he actually had a job before he became president? I don't know, Bill Clinton. Sometimes I wonder about the things he does. The first thing he does is like, he wanted that BTU tax. Remember that? Gonna tax all forms of energy. Didn't matter what it was. It's wind power, water power, and solar energy. That didn't bother you, folks? Bill Clinton had finally found a way to tax the sun? That doesn't bother you, folks? Gonna have like solar police ravaging the beaches of America. You're the suntan, $20. Come on, come on. And do you remember who it is that he had supporting him on NAFTA? Do you remember what presidents he found to support NAFTA? Ford, Carter, and Bush. To tell us how NAFTA was going to improve the economy. He got Ford, Carter, and Bush. To be lectured to on the economy by Ford, Carter, and Bush is like being lectured to on our educational system by Larry, Curly, and Moe. Okay? And you know, the thing is, he was the only candidate that had like an entire book, a novel about what he's going to do with the country. He knows exactly what he's going to do, but he couldn't communicate it because he's got the mind of a modern-day philosopher and the voice of a 2-year-old child. Mr. Zongas, what are you going to do with this country? Well, okay. Well, now Bill Clinton says that he wants to be Santa Claus. And all I'm saying is, I don't want to be Santa Claus. Because hey, shut. And then on the opposite extreme, who do we have? We have Ross Perot. How many Ross Perot fans do we have out here tonight? Yeah, Ross Perot. The man has absolutely no ideas, and we love him. He's like, it is truly unbelievable. The guy that's his entire campaign slogan. I have no damn idea. Vote for me, because I have no idea. I like to call him the this-that candidate. Because that's what I'm talking about. Well, Mr. Perot, what are you going to do with the country? Well, this is what I'm talking about. We can't do anything about this till we take care of that. That's what I'm saying. Until this is taken care of, that ain't going to happen. So what you're saying, Mr. Pro, until we take care of that, we can't even address this. Is that what you're saying? Well, that's right. Folks, aren't you getting a little tired of hearing about how much he doesn't want the job? Doesn't that get, a man is spending millions and millions and millions of dollars and said, I don't want it. I don't want this job. I'd rather be in a dentist chair getting my teeth drills than have this job. I'd rather have every hair of my body plucked out and be sitting in a vat of Vaseline and alcohol before I would take this job. You're killing us with enthusiasm there, pal, huh?
Vaudeville. That's a French term for satirical song. And these are people that do songs and dance, like Al Jolson and such. I didn't do too much vaudeville when I did comedy. Okay, so here's some examples of comics, including improv, who became actors. And it's remarkable how unbelievably talented that stand-up comics are and how well they're able to adapt to doing like acting. I mean, it's remarkable. Dave Chappelle, Steve Martin, Janine Garofalo, Sarah Silverman, Robin Williams, Jim Carrey, Billy Crystal, Martin Lawrence, Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock, Tim Allen, Michael Keaton, Roseanne Barr, Whoopi Goldberg, Tina Fey, Annie Poehler, Paul Reiser, Richard Pryor, Woody Allen, Kevin James, Tom Parks, Rodney Dangerfield. I mean, just look at that list. I mean, these people are really good, not just comics, but as actors. And even more impressive than that is how many comics have become talk show hosts. There's just something unique about successful stand-up comics that really adapt well to becoming a talk show host. Ellen DeGeneres, Jay Leno. And I want to, and you can see a whole list of other folks there, but, Jon Stewart, Bill Maher, and Dennis Miller. I mean, how remarkable are these guys? What I especially want to point out about these individuals is they are open, or have been open, to hearing alternative points of view. Now, you may say to yourself, well, they got to be liberal or to the left or Democrats or whatever, and that may be true. And that may be true with Jon Stewart and Bill Maher or whatever. Dennis Miller, I think, to the right. But any one of these three, I think, are open to alternative ideas. Sort of that libertarian bent, and I think they should get credit for that. Okay, here are examples of prop comics. Steve Martin. Steve Martin used to have an fake arrow through the head, or he played the banjo, still plays the banjo. But as music, not in comedy. Gallagher, Jeff Dunham, Carrot Top. Tim Wilson's a guy I used to work with. He did a lot of guitar parodies. If you ever get a chance, go on the internet, go on YouTube and find The George Song by Tim Wilson. Just brilliant. Impressionists, Frank Caliendo, Rich Little, Kevin Pollak. All right, so what's a club? Club is a comedy performance venue. What is the green room? The green room is where you go before you actually hit the stage. It's the holding area or the lounge. And sometimes it has refreshments, sometimes it doesn't. You might say, why is it called the green room? Well, legend has it that a lot of the times they were painted green. I mean, it sounds sort of empirical. They say that green was the cheapest color paint. I mean, I don't really get that. These rooms were painted green because there was less glare. I don't know. Maybe it was calming. Maybe that's it. I don't know about that either. Something about there's a lot of green makeup. I didn't really understand that. And here's one. Again, this would apply not just to comedy, but green room would apply to acting as well. So maybe in the Shakespearean days, it had lots of plants. Now, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm going with that. I'm going with the origin of the term green room is because these rooms had lots of plants. I don't know that that's true, but that just seems to be plausible to me compared to it was just painted green historically. All right, material. What is material? Material is comedy content. It would be like you had a compilation of songs or lists and such and music. Bit. What's a bit? A bit is a snippet of a stand-up routine. That would be analogous to a song on an album. Okay, and just like songs on an album, like where I'm from, here in Kentucky and such, if you go out and listen to Leonard Skinner or whatever, people are going to be with their lighters, and what are they going to say as they flick their lighters? Play Freebird Man, right? Freebird Man! They're asking for requests. And if you see a famous comic that has really famous bits, you will literally see audience members that'll be calling out for bits, specific bits that they want the comic to do. What's a new bit? I mean, this is not really a definition, but I just want to clarify this. It's sometime within the past year. I heard Jay Leno talk about this, where he did a concert and he said it was all new material, and somebody said, yeah, you said it was new material, but I just heard you do this 2 weeks ago at the club. Folks, that's still new material. It takes a while to generate new material. It's not as though you're going to do a comedy concert, and as you're on the way to the comedy concert, you just start making up material. Okay, it doesn't work that way. You have to try it out. Okay, so it's basically within the past year would be new material, right? Because you've got to try, you got to give it a go. You got to try it out to make that binary decision, yes or no, or go or no go. Plus, a lot of times you do a bit. What happens is, as you're doing the bit, something happens when you do it live, where you phrase it. You're doing it several times over several shows, and some reason you phrase a little bit different and it's better, or there becomes a tagline that you didn't think about and it's better. So not only is trying it out important to determine the binary decision whether it's funny or not, but it also allows you to augment the bit and allow you to make it better. Now at the bottom here, I've got top 3 comedy shows that I would recommend. And I'm doing this strictly from a science of stand-up perspective. Number 1 on my list, Brian Regan, Walk on the Moon. It's a comedy taping in a club, and it's brilliant. From a science of stand-up standpoint, it's just brilliant. Very clean, very clean. Eddie Izzard, Dressed to Kill. Now it's a little bit blue. You got some blue words and such, but again, brilliant. Just absolutely brilliant. From a scientific and a technique standpoint, just brilliant. And then there's got to be a third one that I will leave you to decide in the comment section. But so there's got to be at least another one in there that somebody would recommend that maybe is as good as these two. But these two I would definitely recommend to you if you're interested in the science of stand-up. Okay, what's a set or routine? A set or routine is a performance. It's a show performance. It's collective bits within a specified time. So that would be like the album, if you're going to use a song analogy. What's a gig? A gig is the performance job for a variable number of days. Like you could do a gig, just one night gig, and so that would be just one night. Or you could do an entire week, where you start on a Tuesday or Wednesday and you go all the way through Saturday or Sunday. But the collective performance would be a gig. Punchline, that's the final phase, final phrase that codifies the humor. It's the end of the joke or the one-liner. And the king of that would be Rodney Dangerfield. For those of you that don't know who Rodney Dangerfield is, I'd encourage you to look him up on the internet, watch some of his stuff. The only exception here is Monty Python. So many times Monty Python had great bits, but somehow had difficulty with a punchline. Didn't know how to end the bits. So what did they do? They had cartoons from Terry Gilliam. So if you ever look at Monty Python, you will notice that many times there is no climactic punchline. It just ends with Terry Gilliam doing some sort of innovative cartoon. What's a shtick? That's a comedy gimmick. So it's Yiddish or German for thing. It's my thing. Your shtick is your thing. And it's consistent theme underlying the comedy material. Type 5. Type 5 is 5 minutes of comics material. A lot of times it's their best material that they use for audition or MC work.
See, man versus women. You know, I think the problem here. The problem is here, I think it's come a time. The time has come when I think guys, particularly guys, got to take responsibility here. Have got to be a little bit more emotional. A little bit more romantic. Don't you think, ladies? Wouldn't it be nicer? Yeah. And I think Oh, hell no! No. Just give me some more grease so I can rub on my t-shirt down here. But I think it's going to happen. I think that what you're going to find is in the 1990s, I think there's going to be a whole revolution, particularly in music. People are going to be more sensitive. There's going to be more social messages. And I'll tell you who it's going to come from. It's not going to come from the people raised in the 60s or raised in the 80s. It's going to come from those people that were raised in the 70s. What else do they have to live for? You know what I'm saying? Because if you were raised during the 60s or 80s, you had something to be proud of. But what are you going to tell your kids if you were raised in the 70s? Yeah, son, I was raised in the 60s. Richard Nixon was president, used to wear my hair on down here, had tie-dye t-shirts, bell-bottom jeans, used to listen to Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles all day long. It was a fulfilling childhood. Yes, son, I was raised in the 80s. We went through the Reagan Revolution, had the dissolution of the Cold War, saw a reduction in nuclear arms. We used to listen to the talking heads all day long. Same as it ever was. It was a fulfilling childhood. Yes, son, I was raised during the 70s. Jimmy Carter was president. I used to wear pastel leisure suits, gold chain around the neck. Used to listen to Barry Manilow and disco all day long. I did this a lot. But I think it's going to happen. You're going to find these people that are going to come up with the music. They're going to come up with music that, for example, say in the 80s was good music, but it didn't have any meaning, any social messages. Not like it did in the 60s. We have any 60s fans out here? Yeah. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. In the 80s, we had a band called In Excess. Yeah, good band. They came up with a love song in the 1980s. I need you tonight, because I'm not sleeping. Something about you, babe, that makes me sweat. Kind of a real tearjerker that one is. And philosophy, oh, we had all kinds of philosophy in the 1980s. We had philosophy like Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians. Well, there you had yourself some philosophy. I'm not aware of too many things, but I know what I know, if you know what I mean. So shove me into shallow water before I get too deep. Because what I am is what I am. What you are, or what? Not exactly born dead in Ohio, is it? See, what we need is direction. We need direction, like John Lennon. John Lennon gave us direction. John Lennon told us to follow her down by the fountain, where rocking horse people eat marshmallow pie. I think we all knew what he was talking about there, huh? Hey, do we have any Motown fans out here? Yeah, Motown's the only music in the past 4 decades that appreciated the total dimensions of the woman. My baby long, great gosh almighty, my baby tall. My baby she long, my baby she tall, she sleeps with her head in the kitchen, her feet out in the hall. And I think all of us remember that cryptic message. That cryptic message because it's proven itself true for the past 2 decades. By Frank Zappa, when Frank Zappa told us, looked us right in the eye, and he said, watch out where the Huskies go. Hey, don't you eat that yellow snow. Thank you, good night. My name's Harold Bay.
Segue. Segue is a lead-in or a conjunction piece that ties one bit to the other bit. Now, it can be smooth, where you don't even know what's happening. Or if you do know what's happening, you've seen comics before and you don't even think about it anymore. Sometimes it's stretched. Sometimes it's sort of a tortured connection. It's like, that's how I caught my first largemouth bass, the Micropterus salmoides. And speaking of largemouth, and then they do some bit about some largemouth person or somebody that talks too much or whatever. So it's a bit tortured, but it's used in order to, again, to connect bits. And then sometimes it just is intentionally awkward. A segue can be intentionally awkward. where a person will be talking about astronomy and then say something, yeah, well, I was cooking dinner the other day, and it'll be just jarring, okay? The segue will be jarring where it doesn't seem to be connected, and sometimes that's intentional. It can be used as a comedic device. What's a clean comic? A clean comic basically doesn't use certain types of words. I mean, they may use hell or damn or whatever, but they don't use some of the other more colorful words, and usually acceptable for TV, although it seems to be evolving all the time. And clean comics would be, Brian Regan, Jim Gaffigan, Angela Johnson, Jenna Kim Jones. I would say, at least from TV work, Ellen DeGeneres. So, at least the TV work. So, these would be your clean comics. That doesn't mean that they're not innovative. I think some of the most innovative comics there are the clean comics. The blue comics would be using the foul language, four-letter words, this, such and such, and then this sort of stuff. And paradoxically, that's called adult comedy, which I never really got that, because it's the kind of comedy that you would see, junior high school kids use a lot of time. But anyway, it's termed adult comedy or blue comedy, foul language, and again, you can use this kind of language and still be innovative. What I have a problem with are people that only rely on the blueness of their language, and that's their backbone. Okay, that's what props them up, and that's unfortunate. I don't think you can just say a bunch of foul words and have an expectation people are going to think you're a good comic. Shock comic, being shocking to people only goes so far. For those that like blue comics, I would encourage you to look at Bill Burr, the Philly incident, or Philly rant. You can see that on the internet. And this is where a comic got up, and it was outside. Never do outside comedy, folks. I'm just warning you. Doing outside comedy in Philadelphia, and first act gets up there, and they weren't paying a bit of attention. If they were paying attention, they were just harassing him and heckling the first guy. And apparently he was a pretty good guy, pretty good comic, whatever. And Bill Burr gets to the stage, and he goes, "I've had enough." I don't know that he did any material. He just did blue stuff in front of the crowd, and that's the Philly incident or rant. So for those that like that kind of stuff, I would encourage you to look at that to see how far to an extreme that you can take this type of comedy. And in its own way, I mean, it was brilliant. Sarah Silverman has given interviews with regard to the use of blue language and such. Norm Macdonald is a mystery to me. He's very, very funny. Doesn't have to be blue, but he just likes being blue. Now on TV, he's not blue because you can't be blue, but at other times, Norm Macdonald will gravitate towards being blue. Okay, stock material. These are common bits utilized by a bunch of different comics. Stock material. Then there's the D.K jokes. These are profane jokes about sexuality and sexual organs. If you want to know more about that, there's an article written about this, published in Journal of Folklore Research in 2017, The Artful Accomplishment of Humor in a D.K joke competition. Okay, so you can read about the science there. There are categorical comics. For example, there used to be Def Jam, which were African Americans. Queens of comedy were women. Blue collar comedy, this was people that oriented their comedy towards the country or the South. Dark comics, comics with morbid or gallows humor. Insult comics, comics that make offensive statements toward individuals or groups or even the audience. Don Rickles would be, I think, the classic example there. Shock comic, totally unconcerned about offensive material or deliberately provocative. Andrew Dice Clay comes to mind. Avant-garde or alternative comics, where they're experimental or unorthodox.
is. Yeah, I'm cool. I'm cool and I got a hat. I'm a cool cat in the hat. I remember when I first met him. His name was Sam. Sam I am. I remember when I was young. I'd be alone in my room with my Legos and my Rector set. And I would lock my door so as that I would not be disturbed. But I was disturbed. I tried to go to a friend's house last night to a party. But I took a wrong turn. I ended up in the clouds with the Greek gods. There on a cumulus nimbus was Hercules. I said, hey, H-baby, where's Zeus, Apollo, and the rest of the guys? And he said, well, they're all over at Medusa's, probably stoned by now. And there Gorbachev stood before the masses of Soviet dissidents. With a cry of freedom on their lips, he stood before them. He slowly began to levitate. Shrubbery began growing from his ears, obstructing the vision of oncoming traffic. And I said, doesn't that disturb your vision? And Gorbachev said, yes, it is disturbing.
Then there's the hack comic, and that is definitely a pejorative. Hack comic just uses or just recites overused or unoriginal material. If you ever hear a comic that goes, why is it that tornadoes only hit trailer parks? Okay, that would be a hack comic in most cases, okay? Or if you hear a comic do a bit where a boyfriend or husband is instructed to go to the grocery market to get feminine hygiene product, and he's embarrassed enough, and he goes to the cashier, and he's got these embarrassing feminine hygiene products that he's purchased, and then the comedy part is when the cashier cannot find the price on these items, and then uses the loudspeaker to say price check on, and then they'll name the feminine hygiene products, and because a man is totally humiliated, well, that's when the hilarity ensues. Okay, so that would be the example of a hack comic, because that's been done a few times. Sociopolitical comics, material focused on society and politics. That's what I mainly did. I mainly did sociopolitical comedy. Populist comedy, point of view for which the audience agrees and will applaud, even if it's not funny. I did that a lot as well. Matter of fact, I was accused of that once. I was having a particularly good week at a gig at a comedy venue there, and I was middle, and the opener was jealous because they knew that wasn't ultimately going to be my vocation for the rest of my life, and they were just upset that I was doing well. So he accused me of being a populist comic. And then what's the next thing he does? He gets up on stage and does some D.K jokes, which I found to be ironic.
Now we're over there, just got back from this Persian Gulf thing, and friends, I'm sorry to tell you this, but the media is very upset with us. The media is upset with us because we did not admire them for covering the war live. Well, maybe one person's opinion, but I think if you're too damn stupid to come in and out of a war, You do not deserve to be admired. You know what I'm saying? For example, the first night, did you see the first night of the war? Here CNN is on top of that hotel. Right about here, I believe. Bernard Shaw's here going, well, Jim, as you can see, the entire skyline of Baghdad is lit up like a fireworks display. We're covering it live. Well, Jim, it appears my left foot has been hit by a TOW missile. And it's just exploded. Live. And then another thing you got to say, this is just a personal opinion. Not everybody's going to agree with this, but I just want you to hear me out. Hear me out on this. The Patriot missile. America's just went wild about the Patriot missile. Oh, the Patriot missile. The Patriot missile cost $1 million a piece to build. That's its job, is to knock down incoming Scuds. Why is it when one of our pieces of military equipment actually works for a change, we just start going wild? I mean, if you spent $1 million on a car and it started up one morning, how wild are you going to be? Mark, get up. You know that $1 million car we just bought? I went out in the garage, turned on the ignition. That thing started right up. I think I'll call CNN. Yes, I will. We spent $300 million to miss. Now, our missile defense system is very simple. Sea, air, and land. Very simple. Now, in the sea, we have the $24 million submarine-launched Trident II missile. In March of 1989, we test-launched this missile, which time it went up 100 feet and exploded. The Navy said it malfunctioned. Now, I'm no expert on military jargon, but I'm guessing the word malfunction means we just lost $24 million. But old Ron went out and he won us the war. He won us that Grenada thing. You remember that? Oh, come on, you remember Grenada. Grenada is a little bitty island about the size of Nicholasville. Okay? The only difference is Nicholasville's got more firearms, huh? And it didn't bother me. We took over this little bitty island. What bothered me is we were just damn proud of it. You remember that? Yep, I'm an American. Don't just have to worry about those Grenadians messing with me anymore. And how long is it going to be before we're going to have to start listening to Grenada vet stories, huh? Yes, son, I was in the big one in the 1980s. I'm a Grenada vet. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat. I'm having a Grenada flashback. It'll be me and 30,000 of my buddies. And we'll be crouched behind that resort hotel. And we commenced upon this little guy. We got our M16. He's got his travel guide brochure.
Okay, so physical comic. Comics that incorporate kinesiology or kinesiologic body movements like slapstick or such. I don't know how many people know the origin of the word slapstick. You've probably heard of slapstick when it comes to physical comics and such, but the origin of the word slapstick comedy comes from the fact that there, in past performances, there literally was a stick that they would slap, and so when someone would hit someone, they would slap the stick, and it would make this stick slapping sound when this person supposedly hit somebody else, and so it accentuated this physical comedy, and that's the reason they call it slapstick comedy. Road comic. Road comic is a comic who frequently travels and performs at multiple clubs at different locations. And I was a road comic, and I knew a lot of my buddies were road comics. Most of the comics I knew were road comics. And the challenge there may lead to compromise of person or originality. Now, the originality can't speak for, I think sometimes people use road comic as a pejorative, and they shouldn't, because it's hard work, and it is demeaning work, and it's just, you talk about heroes, man. To be a yearly road comic is how it is that you're generating money for you and your family. Wow, it's both sort of romantic, but it's also can be tragic. I remember I was watching one of my buddies. He's doing a show, And this time it wasn't necessarily on the road. It was a fairly reputable comedy club, and he's doing his bits, and he's doing fine. Somebody just laughed out of turn. They didn't mean anything by it. They weren't heckling him. But he'd been on the road for like 2 months. And this person just laughed out of turn. Just, I don't know why. Maybe he just got the joke. I don't know. But my buddy just laid into the guy, just crushed him. I was like, what is wrong? It's okay. You're not doing the road stuff anymore. You're safe. You don't have to be crushing people like that. Okay. Corporate comic. These are comics who perform at corporate meetings or retreats, often with educational messages. Sometimes I'm not so sure what those educational messages are. They pretend they're educational, but who's to say? Boat comics. Yet again, these are heroes to me. Because can you imagine having to do comedy, stand-up comedy, and do so with material that's going to not offend all the different types of people that you find on a boat? But there are people that do it, and there are people that do it well, and I really admire the boat comic people. Hard work. So here are some examples of categorical comics, like in Def Jam was D.L. Hughley and Martin Lawrence, and the country blue-collar comedy, Ollie Joe Prater. Well, I don't know if he actually did the blue-collar comedy, but he certainly would be in that genre. Jeff Foxworthy, Tim Wilson. Examples of experimental comics, I would say Andy Kaufman, Stephen Wright, to some degree, Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, Emo Phillips, Maria Bamford. I think these are more on the experimental side. Example of sociopolitical comics, George Carlin, Dave Chappelle. And let me just say this right off the bat. If I had to pick the 2 best comics in my lifetime, and from what I've seen ever, if you're talking about stand-ups, George Carlin, Dave Chappelle. Okay, 1A, 1B. Those are the people that I would put at the top. Then you have Janine Garofalo, Louis Black, Dennis Miller. Jeff Turbino was a fellow out of Minneapolis, I think, and I worked with him a few times, and he really inspired me because he would do sociopolitical comedy, not because he was all that political, it was just funny. And he showed me how sociopolitical comedy can be funny. Example of physical comics, Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, Laurel and Hardy. And then, of course, before that, you had Charlie Chaplin, Marx Brothers, Three Stooges, and everything. And then finally, you have comics like Lenny Bruce, which we're going to talk about Lenny Bruce. But Lenny Bruce, I mean, I've watched some of his material. This was back in the day. And I've watched some of his material. I can't say that I was a particular fan of his. It didn't make me laugh. But as far as his social impact, it's just immeasurable. And he used to tell people, I'm not a comedian. I'm not a comedian. I am Lenny Bruce. And that was an inspiration to many folks like me. So it's amazing how you can inspire people, even if in stand-up comedy, even if those same stand-up comics don't find you like the funniest comic. Okay, let's talk about Janine Garofalo. I think Janine Garofalo is a genius. I looked at a list of the top 100 women comics of all time. Janine Garofalo was not on the list. Folks, I don't know how you come up with a list of the top 100 women comics of all time and you don't have Janine Garofalo in the top 5, much less not even listed. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, aren't you from Kentucky? Yeah. Didn't you see that interview that she gave? I did. Don't you think in some ways she was talking about you? Yeah, maybe. But folks, just because a person has an opinion about my particular demographic doesn't mean I can't appreciate their genius. And Janine Garofalo, I think, is really, really good. Okay, really, really good. And also, I believe in the 90 plus 5 plus 5 principle. And that is that for most people, most reasonable people, if you were to meet them, you would probably agree on 90% of stuff. 5% of stuff you would disagree upon, and another 5% you would violently disagree. But where we are here in the 2020s is we always want to exaggerate and blow things completely out of proportion when it comes to the 5% that we violently disagree. And why do we do this? Because it's politics. Politics is the exaggeration of narrow differences to give people the illusion of choice. Right? That's what the politicians want to focus upon. They want to focus upon the 5% of things or 10% of things for which we disagree and don't want to enhance or address the 90% of the stuff that we do agree. Right? So my guess is, and I could be dead wrong, is if I were to ever have met Janine Garofalo, we would probably get along just fine. I could be wrong. That's what I think. Observational comedy. All right, so when you think of observational comedy, you got to think about Jerry Seinfeld. Now, my guess is he's probably tired of being associated with that all the time. Observational comedy, but he's just so good. He's just so instrumental in the history of stand-up comedy. And what this is, it's a universal technique, observational comedy. You make observations, and then you talk about it in a comedic way. And if you think about it, this should come as no surprise that observational comedy would be so popular, because the way we think about things in patterns. Our cognitive pathways gravitate towards and within patterns. And when you observe things, you're observing those patterns. So for example, computer codes and music and puzzles and dancing and script writing and acting. Well, what do they all have in common? They're patterns. And these patterns often come in what? Threes. The Holy Trilogy. Story titles. Three Little Pigs. Three Musketeers. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Comes in threes. That's going to become important here in a minute, folks. If you look at shampoo, lather, rinse, repeat in threes. If you look at jazz, up in the upper right here, you have John Coltrane, and lower left here, you got William Shakespeare. But the jazz, you have the 2-5-1 turnaround, okay? Where it follows the circle of fifths. You have the second chord minor scale, the fifth chord dominant scale, and it resolves to the one chord tonic or root scale, 2-5-1 progression. That's one of the most common progressions in jazz. So now I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. Now, if you're watching this, presumably it's because you want to know about the science of stand-up. So there's nothing to spoil here, because I'm going to tell you about stand-up. I'm going to reveal secrets. But if you like the science of stand-up to remain a mystery, then don't watch this part anymore, because I'm going to give you a spoiler. So what did Aristotle say? Aristotle said, it's 300 BC, talked about the speaking triad. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And that's exactly one of the most common techniques in stand-up comedy. In the science of stand-up, that's one of the most common techniques. What you do is you first set up the premise, which is the 2 in jazz. Then you do the bit, and that's the 5. Then you act it out, and that's the 1. Right? You set up the premise, you do the bit, maybe even with the punchline, and then you follow it with the root. You follow it up with acting it out. You act out the bit that you just described. That's the 2-5-1 or the observational comedy triad.
And now the courts have decided that the SAT, this is unbelievable. Correct me if I'm wrong about this. The courts have decided that the SAT scores are discriminatory against women. I read that because what kind of mamby-pamby? It's absolutely true, completely discriminatory against women. One of the math questions was, and I read it, one of the math questions was, if there are 3 items on sale for $500 a piece, and you have a $1,000 limit on your credit card, how many of these items can you buy? will say 2. A woman will say, hey. Raise that limit to $1,500. They believe this. It's not that women are wrong. They just think a little differently than guys. For example, a guy might say, honey, I'm a little depressed. Let's go to punchlines, have a few laughs. Makes sense. Women just as likely say, honey, I'm a little depressed. Let's go to a movie like Terms of Endearment so I can cry my eyes out. Nothing like the tragedy of another human being to brighten a woman's day. Have you ever noticed that, guy? And women are always saying things like, men can't communicate. Well, I think we could communicate if we knew what the hell you were talking about half the time. And then because they know I deal with hormones, they hit me with that next one. And not only that, Dr. Bays, why is it that I suffer from severe PMS? Well, you know as well as I do that PMS stands for premenstrual syndrome, implying that it only occurs before the menstrual cycle. Well, there's another condition out there. Another condition I like to call EMS. The eternal menstrual syndrome. These are women that are pretty much hacked off all the time, okay? And you know who you are. Right out here, I can see you. We can open up an EMS support group in this room, I believe we absolutely could. Yes. So I'm not making fun of women, but you know, there's some of these things that I just find unbelievable. Like, for example, ladies, how hard can it be to remember what kind of surgeries you've had? How hard can it be to remember what kind of organs you have had removed from your body? You know, this is free advice, absolutely free. You can take it home, I'm not going to charge you a cent. Ladies, once a year, you ought to take inventory on your body. Once a year, figure out kind of like how many organs you started out the year with. How many you got now? Subtract the 4 from the letter, that's how many you had taken out. Okay, it's that simple. Do you know how frustrating it is to be examining a woman and saying, well, Miss Jones, you appear to have a large midline abdominal scar. What kind of surgery did you have? Well, I don't know. Well, did you have your uterus taken out, your ovaries taken out? Well, I don't know. How can you not know? Well, the doctor didn't tell me. When you like in there in that conversation, huh? Only people have got nothing to do tomorrow. Why don't you just drop on by the OR and, oh, what are you going to do, doctor? Oh, don't worry your pretty little head about that. We're just going to be taking out some organs. But the point I'm making is that men won't talk about these sorts of things. You know? They won't talk about their reproductive system. That doesn't happen with women. You have a woman miss about 2 or 3 menstrual periods in a row, she is kicking down the door going, hey. Why aren't I bleeding? See, she's going to want to know. Which is why I believe that God decided that men should never, ever have menstrual periods. They couldn't handle the responsibility. Oh, come on, ladies, you know the conversation. You know how it would go down. If men had menstrual periods, it'd be like, Mr. Jones, you've not had a menstrual period in over a year? Why didn't you tell somebody? Well, didn't miss it. See, that would be the attitude that they
And it's even reflected in the gifts that you buy. For example, ladies, you want to make a guy happy. You want to make him happy, give him something practical. Go out and give him a power tool. I love my wife. She went out and got me a power tool. Think I'm going to build me a desk. Maybe next year she'll give me an axe. All I knew was a myth. I'm a legend. But guys, the next time your wife or girlfriend has an anniversary or birthday, just try to buy her something practical. Go out and buy her a dustbuster.
And I have learned when you talk about advice, men and women react very differently. For example, men, as in life, just don't have a clue. You know what I mean? Just not a clue. Because there's at least one area in which men are infinitely less logical than women. And that's in the area of sports. Because guys get involved in sports, all reality just blasts out of the brain, you know? I used to belong to the YMCA in the span of 1 year. I sprained my ankle 3 times. Each time it's the same thing. Now, this has happened to each and every guy in here. Ankles swollen the size of a melon. Bony fragments are just flying out everywhere. That ankle apparatus is holding by that single tendon. And do I seek professional medical advice? No. I listen to some high school dropout at the gym. Who comes over and goes, well, you know what you ought to do with that? You ought to just walk that off. I get the sweat down some vice grips I got back in the car, huh? The point here is men do not respect physical injury. Do not respect it. For example, guys are shaving, cut yourself. What do? Cover it with toilet paper. Because nothing will initiate that clotting cascade quite like a roller Charmin. Well, fellas, huh? But see, these are physical injuries. But ladies, back me up on this. Let a guy get a cold or a flu. Did I touch a nerve? If a guy gets a cold or a flu, it doesn't matter what you got going on in your lives. The minute the guy gets a cold or a flu, all of a sudden Mr. Macho becomes Mr. Mamby-Pamby. Am I right about this, ladies? Pretty much.
And the reason people like this so much is because it's a humorous exploration of everyday life. How many times have you heard people say, oh, that comic guy he talked about everyday life and everything he said, it's just so true. That's the quote you hear, isn't it? It's just so true what he said or what she said. It's just so true. And that's what people want to hear, observational comedy. Because people respond favorably to familiarity, which is why you have to be careful as a stand-up. We had a stand-up come to Louisville, Kentucky one time, and his first 15 minutes was about subways. I mean, I get it. He's from New York. Maybe he killed in New York, but here's a news flash for you, pal. No subways in Louisville. We don't have subways. People don't know what you're talking about. So if you do a 15-minute bit on subways, people are not going to be able to relate to it. Might be funny, but not here. Okay. Finally, people respond favorably to agreement, whether it be religion or politics or specifically anti-authority. We're going to talk a lot more about that later on. And people like to share experiences and annoyances and hypocrisy and whatever. And the thing that I want to emphasize most is, even though I'm giving you these tips about how to do stand-up, and I'm going to give you a whole lot more, I want to make sure everybody knows that you still have to do the work and you still have to do the time. Stand-up comedy is just like any other vocation, folks. It takes work and it takes time. It's not something that you're just born with and it just happens. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. All right. So why am I making such a big deal about literary devices and the 2-5-1 progression and these types of things and patterns? It's because having these patterns or these phrases or things are what tie us together. And that's very important when you start talking about the science of stand-up. So here's the joke that, or tale that you've probably heard a lot of times. A high school teacher assigns reading of Shakespeare to the class. And then the students come back the next day and the teacher goes, well, what did you think about Shakespeare when you read Shakespeare? And one of the students raised up his hand and said, I didn't like it that much. And like, well, why is that? And the student said, well, I just think Shakespeare uses too many cliches. Right? You probably heard that. Okay. And what's the point of that story? The point of that story is, folks, it wasn't a cliche until Shakespeare came up with them. Right? Shakespeare is who originated the original cliche. And here are common phrases from Shakespeare. Wild goose chase, pure as the driven snow, seen better days, forever and a day, good riddance, it's Greek to me, as luck would have it. You've got to be cruel to be kind, break the ice, heart of gold, kill the kindness, knock, knock, who's there? all of these originated from Shakespeare, right? Now, I don't think most people know that. Okay, they just think, I mean, I don't know what people think, how it got into our vernacular, but that's the way it is. And that's what happens with observational comedy. For the observational comic, is we have these certain topics and categories and such that people are used to hearing about. The challenge becomes is if it becomes too common. Okay, too common. So I've seen Jerry Seinfeld on some of his more recent routines, and he's kind of gravitated away sometimes from the observational comic. My guess is he doesn't forever want to be known as the observational comic, and he has no other abilities. But I think that just devalues his contribution. There's nothing wrong with saying how much he contributed to observational comic. That's history, folks. It's history. It should be congratulated. It should be appreciated. But as I said, commonality may lead to parody. So you've probably seen parodies about stand-up comics. They'll say things like, why is it? Why is it? Why is it? And then they'll, fill in the blank. Or they'll say, what's up with that? Why is it? And then what's up with that? And that would be a parody, making fun of this commonality of observational comics. So they're just commonly used phrases, commonly used techniques. When we use phrases in our everyday language, a lot of them came from Shakespeare, but these techniques that we hear and encounter from a lot of comics and such, the reason they're common is because they worked and they were funny and they were used so much by really good comics. So if you find you're doing observational comedy and you're starting to feel like you're not being particularly original, then what are techniques to avoid commonality and to set yourself apart? Well, obviously the material you use or the devices you use, or you could introduce literary devices, and that'll be part 2 of the section on definitions. We're going to incorporate 50 literary devices into stand-up comedy. Or you could take the John Coltrane approach, where you could engage in the equivalent of chord substitutions of unexpected notes. So there's this song many of you know called Giant Steps, which is described as revered and feared, of a 2-5-1 progression with chord substitution circulating in major thirds. They're called the Coltrane changes. I have tried to play Giant Steps, but I've never actually really played Giant Steps. Okay, I just haven't. Not good enough, or I haven't worked at it enough, haven't spent enough time on it, and I may not be good enough. Or you could engage in creative segues and unexpected comedy turnarounds, analogous to the progression of changes to the unexpected points of circle of fifths. So again, I think we can look to folks like Shakespeare and John Coltrane to provide us guidance how we can expand our stand-up comedy beyond that of what you would typically hear from an observational comic. All right, what's a mic? You would think that would be so easy, okay? But mic can be spelled M-I-K-E, or it can be spelled M-I-K. Either way, it's a microphone. But if you look at to purchase a mic, it's going to be spelled M-I-C. And if you go to Comedy Club, it's going to be M-I-C. Because, really, I've seen it sometimes open mic, but open mic, M-I-K-E, that sounds like a person. It sounds like you're going to be doing vivisection or something on somebody. You're advertising how you're going to be doing like those old-timey operations where you're in the operating theater and all the medical students are watching as you do an autopsy or something. That's the open mic. Most places, I think they go with open mic, M-I-C. Then there's the microphone can either be on a stand or not a stand. Now you will notice when you see some of my stand-up that I did, these little bits that I'm going to throw in, that I held on to the microphone stand. That was just my style. But you have other people that hold on to the mic, and now we have wireless mics and such. Okay, but a lot of people like to use the mic because they can use it as as a device or as a prop. So, for example, comics will put their hand over a mic and it gives a certain sort of sound. It makes it sound like they're either trying to keep a secret or maybe they're trying to make an announcement or something. So they can use the mic as a prop. What's timing? Timing is the ebb and flow dance with the audience. And you got to be careful. You would think that's really easy, but it's not. Sometimes you get bigger laughs than you expected. You end up stepping on your lines or stepping on the laughs. Sometimes you do a big bit. You're waiting for the big payoff and nobody laughs. It throws your timing off. Okay. So timing, important. The other thing is, as a comic, you must do your time. You can't do more than your time, and you can't do less than your time. Now, you can do that, but it just means you're not going to get much work in the future. I mean, if they tell you to do a half hour, you don't do 29, you don't do 31. You do 30 minutes, right? Because you got to keep the show intact, and you can't say it's a bad crowd, I'm just going to bail. Can't do that either. Or you can't say I'm having a really good show, so now I'm going to put off the headliner till later on or something. I mean, no. All right, the performance order. There is an order to stand-up comics. So the opener is often the MC. It's the first act. Usually does 10 to 15 minutes and introduces the other comics. The challenge here is better know the people's names. Man, when I did MC work or when I was the opener when I first started out, I don't know why I had so much trouble, but I, for the life of me, could not remember people's names. I mean, there were only 2 other people, but I just froze. I mean, it was a real challenge for me. The middle or feature act is the second act. They do the medium amount of time, usually about 30 minutes. It takes about 3 to 5 years to get to be a middle, my experience. Headliner or closer is the last act. They get to do the most amount of time, or have to do the most amount of time. It's about 40 minutes. Unless they're a headliner for other reasons, or they're just really talented, it usually takes about 10 years to become a headliner. And then there's the guest set or showcase, where you have a hometown person or famous person, a famous visiting comic, who is inserted into the lineup to do a guest set or a showcase. So we talked about order. What are other factors that determine the order of stand-up comics? It depends on who works the crowd. If you have a comic that just wants to be real chatty with the crowd, engages in a dialogue, and encourages chattiness, I think you're going to find a lot of headliners don't like to follow that. Because if they're doing an act, they don't want to follow somebody that's just got the audience all chatty when that's not what they do. So that affects the order. And if you're a comic that really likes to work the crowd and get everybody all chatty, you're going to limit the kind of work that you get because there's people that are not going to want to follow you. Okay. Other factors: clean material, not relying upon obscenity or explicit sexual content. May use some curse words, but not F word or these types of things. May include, may do innuendos, may be provocative, but again, doesn't use the really blue stuff. The advantage of doing clean material, which is I would like to think that I did, is that anybody can follow you. And that's the reason I got so much work. I limited myself mostly to being a middle because I wanted to work with famous headliners. And anybody could follow me because I was clean. If you were a blue comic, you could follow me. If you were a clean comic, you could follow me. So I could work with anybody. So anybody who wants to be a stand-up comic, my personal judgment is learn how to work clean. And then later on, if you become a headliner and you want to go blue, I mean, that's fine. But if you're looking for work and you want to be, multi-purpose, start out clean. Okay. Other factors that determine order. Well, I think I already mentioned this. Blue comics or adult material, the indecent, profane, use of frequent expletives, usually about sex. Clean can follow clean. Blue can follow clean. Blue can follow blue. But many times it's best that clean does not follow blue. If you have a clean act, and there right before them is a blue comic that's working the crowd and just causing all kinds of chaos and such, makes it really tough. Makes it really tough. By the way, people wonder why is it called glue? Why is it called blue comedy, right? Blue comic. What's the origin of the word blue? And as best I can tell, is that the origin was because of a blue pencil was used to edit unacceptable material in place. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but sounds reasonable to me. And when it comes to blue comics, you might say, well, you're only talking about men, aren't you? I am not just talking about men. Women can be just as blue as men. And if you look at this is a survey that was done, swearing in the workplace. This is 2016. They did a survey. More women admitted swearing than men. I got to tell you, in my profession, now I'm not talking about stand-up, I'm talking about medical research, I think this is true. I think this is true. I'm not going to go any further than that. What's open mic night? Open mic night is often a Tuesday, but it could be different nights, where amateurs can perform or where professionals can audition or try new materials. Then there's the bringer show. This was a new one for me. I was not aware of this term, but this is a requirement of bringing 10 paying customers for an aspiring comic to perform. I don't think that was common 20, 30 years ago. Kill means to do well. Bomb or die means to do poorly. And when I say do poorly, the worst thing is not to be heckled or whatever. The worst is silence, nothingness. Folks, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And that's the worst. One of the worst things that can happen as a comic is you're about at minute 10 and no one is laughing. And the only thing you hear amongst the silence is the isoclap. And what's the isoclap? The isoclap is this. This sends shivers down my spine. I still remember this, okay? So you're 10 minutes into your routine. This is what you hear. Right after your killer bit, that's what you hear. What a horrible thing to do to somebody. The other thing that can happen is chatter. You can have people start chattering and talking. They're ignoring you completely. That's happened to me. I was in Jackson, Tennessee, and they were not listening to me. They had no interest in sociopolitical comedy. Trust me. Or here's one. When you get done, the headliner or the person following you feels compelled to say the following. Give him a hand. He's working really hard for you. You do not want to hear that, okay? Give him a hand. He's really working hard for you. That means you messed up.
Okay, have a little special guest for you all tonight. This individual's been on a 2-candle special, and he's had numerous benefits for the American Diabetes Association and stomach relief-free benefits for homeless. He tours all around the country, and I wish we ran together. Please welcome the disturbing comedy of Harold Day. Great to be here. I think we're all going to turn around and I was sitting back there watching the ceremony, and I got to admit, I'm kind of touched. I think we're all going to bring away certain memories, and certainly I didn't remember how to bring it. But Ron was up there on the stage, up to the girls, and he had that zoo, he had that baseball cap on, and he was there and said, well, I guess it's a little hard to sing and blow at the same time, huh? Young lady told me I was going to be performing in Nashville, like I was excited. And they told me it was Nashville, Indiana. And I knew I'd find a band to meet. It's good to be here, all the things to do. We get somebody direction, we don't just give them direction. We give them a vibe, that's what we do. Excuse me, you direct me to Scott? Scott, well, I tell you, go down the road about a mile. There on the right, you're going to see a pickup truck, and as they make it, pickup truck change over 5 years to break it. But that's the only thing that kept on the product to drink. Because the only life you can say is that he can take a pine and drink it. But he didn't make the best fishing Listen up, people. This is comedy we got going up here. How many people have seen a comedy show before? About all. Nobody. Okay, great. Well, this is how it works. I get up here and say some, ridiculous stuff, and what you do is you go, that's funny, and start laughing, okay? But that's all we have. We spent $300 million a year on this. Well, here we got the B1B bomb. That's the fast thing people see. It's got the cracked wings. When it accelerates the speed, the wings are cracked and it's falling away. Now, March 1989,
Here's something to know when we're talking about the open mic people, and then the opener people, and then the middle people, and then the headliner. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. Many of you probably heard of this, that people tend to think they know more about things before they actually know about things. And the Dunning-Kruger effects of reasoning, and this certainly does apply to stand-up. At open mic night, many times people get up there and it's like the first time they've ever done comedy, and people know it. And they get up and they kill. They do great. And everybody's laughing. And they got all their friends. And they think they're hilarious. And they're like, man, I could do this. This is easy. And so they somehow persuade the club to let them do a pre-opener audition, or sometimes allow them to be an opener just based upon their performance on an open mic night. And then suddenly their performance and confidence plummets, okay? Because now they're just thrown into the wild, and it's not as easy as it looks, folks. So you may have killed on open mic night, but oh my goodness, start doing this for a living. Start doing multiple nights with multiple different audiences and multiple different venues, and suddenly what seemed so easy ain't so easy, and it takes years to kind of build up where you can do consistently well at a variety of audiences and a variety of clubs. Heckler. I'm going to talk more about this when I talk about how to close out a set and techniques. But a heckler basically is an audience member who interrupts the show in many different ways. Sometimes they're not meaning to be evil. They're not even meaning to interrupt. They just, we'll talk about it, okay? But there are some people that do want to engage the performer. And sometimes you have to engage a heckler. And what I find is interesting is the audience reaction. It's like, we hate it that this guy's heckling like this comic, but we're sure glad we're here to see it, okay? Because there is this sense among audiences that they believe that stand-up comics ought to be able to know how to deal with a heckler. Folks, it's not true. Just because somebody's really good as a stand-up does not mean they know how to handle a heckler, or that they want to handle a heckler, okay? That's not what they did when they put together their routine, okay? But you have to deal with it. You have to learn how to deal with it. And the audience will sit back and they're like, okay, Chuckles, what have you got? Right? They're looking at the performer and say, okay, Chuckles, what have you got? And I think the reason they do that is because they know that while before you were doing your routine, which they're smart enough to know that you've done that routine many times, and you're going to be doing it many times that week if you're doing a week at a club. But what they also know is this moment where you're being heckled will never happen again. This is it. Once, not just in a lifetime, once and forever. This moment will never exist again. And they want to know, can you handle it? Just like a sports figure. When things get tough, how can you come through? To what degree do you have the skill set to come through and come out ahead? Improvisation or ad-lib bits, or reactions or techniques need to be a bit careful. I don't want to be again disclosing things that shouldn't be disclosed, but a lot of times when you see improvisational comedy, maybe 50% isn't so improvisational. It's bits that worked before when they did improv or they heard other people do. But having said that, there are still people that can do real improv where they really are making stuff up on the fly, and that's amazing.
And there I stood on the rocky edges of a distant cloud, and the three bees, the one-eyed sailor, and the dog with no teeth said, "Don't touch that door, lest it might be disturbing." And I said, "Yes, it is disturbing." I like to do a song I wrote. Flintstones, it's the Flintstones. It's a modern Stone Age family. Born in the town of Bedrock, it's placed right out of history.
But having this ability to manufacture this pseudo-improv, like where it sounds like you're being spontaneous, but you're really not, is useful when things go sideways. I was doing a presentation at the American Heart Association, presenting an abstract on a drug that 3 weeks prior to the presentation had been withdrawn from development due to safety issues. And I noticed as I was waiting my turn to give my presentation, in the small room, packed with people just lying. I mean, they were standing room only because people wanted to hear about this drug, what happened. And I'm getting ready to give my presentation, and I noticed that even though people were told to keep their phones off, they didn't, and phones were ringing. And this was a drug being developed in Japan, and so I got up there on the podium, and I started presenting, and sure enough, somebody's phone went off, like I knew that it would, but I was prepared. So rather than let me distract me and everybody else as I was doing my presentation, I said, "Excuse me," as the phone rang, I pointed to the person who was answering the phone. I said, "Excuse me, if that's Tokyo, tell them I'll have to call them back." Now, it wasn't particularly funny here, but it killed there. Okay, it killed at the American Heart Association. Why? Because they thought I was being spontaneous, when in fact I was already prepared to say this before I even hit the podium. Then there's always the AV people, which the audiovisual people are always mucking around doing something on the stage when you're trying to do a performance. I was doing some work, giving a presentation. These AV people started, and this was, doing all sorts of crazy stuff that was not completely unnecessary. There was nothing wrong with the lights, nothing wrong with the audio. I don't know what they were doing, but it was totally distracting. And this was during the time of political turmoil due to wiretapping on the part of the federal government and everything. And so when these people started slinking around my stage, and I said, "Hey, folks, don't worry about them. They're just part of the NSA doing their job." So again, it wasn't so much that it was funny, it's that it was thought to be spontaneous. What about misdirection or unexpected twist? That's an unanticipated line or unanticipated choice or unanticipated path. For those of you that are unfamiliar, in 2008 there was a sitcom called The Middleman. Best sitcom ever. Only was one season. It was on completely the wrong network, but it was fabulous. I mean, like many of you probably seen Mystery Science Theater 3000, MST3K. They would make fun of this by saying O2STK, which is owners too secret to know. I think it was owners. Can't remember what the O was, but anyway, what it was is you had this middleman, and this middleman was in this, green jacket, this paramilitary jacket and such, and he was recruiting this woman named Wendy. And he's wanting her to join his organization, which dealt with the paranormal. And so he was talking to this Wendy, this woman he was trying to recruit, and he says, "I'm more like an independent contractor." And Wendy, the recruit, said, "What does that mean? You build strip malls, kill people, what?" And the middleman says, "I'd never build strip malls." Now, why is that funny? It's funny because when Wendy says, "What does that mean? You build strip malls, kill people what, you would expect if he was going to not deny one of those, he would say, I don't kill people. But because he said, I'd never build strip malls, the implication is that he would kill people. Hence, the funny. So that's the misdirection or the unexpected twist. You hear that a lot in comedy. Ellen DeGeneres is the queen of that. Okay, those little taglines at the end that were unexpected. What's a topper or tag or a throwaway line? That's the comment you make after a punchline or a bit. You could say something like, oh yeah, that's because she was Brazilian. And then you would say that again later on when it really didn't make much sense, but it would be funny because it's a repetition. And well, we'll talk about that, comedic devices on the next video. One I heard from Jay Leno once is he did a bit about tools and such, and or building something, I forget which. And then as a throwaway line, he just simply said, yeah, better use an Allen wrench on that one. How's this funny? Why is this funny? It had little to do with the joke. It's not a punchline, but it's a throwaway line. It's a tag. It's a topper. And it's funny. People like to hear things like that. Callback is a reference to a prior bit or a tag or event or a phrase. I would often do something where there would be something of annoyance and I'd go, hey, 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 hey. And that would be my sort of callback. I would go back to that. But other people, there are a lot of other comics that use different types of callbacks. I ain't got no respect, or that's not right, Kevin Meaney, that sort of thing. Again, callback, these devices that people use. So those are just some of the examples of definitions in stand-up comedy, and they're quite often used in application of the science of stand-up. Please click on the subscribe button to add this channel to your YouTube TV subscriptions. Click the notification button to be notified of new content. Click on the like button if you like the video. Click on the share button to share this with other folks through email, Twitter, Facebook. And then here are some questions that I would like for you to answer in the comments section. Other than literary devices, what are other common comedy definitions that I left out? I think I got most of them, but what did I miss? Name some examples where a clean comic successfully followed a blue comic. Okay, so you got a blue comic who does a lot of blue material, gets the audience really chatty, and then a clean comic who does clean material gets up and trying to do this act and did really well. Give me an example where that happened. So overall, I want to thank you for your attention to this YouTube video entitled The Science of Stand-Up Definitions. And please join me for the follow-up part 2, where I will be talking about definitions regarding literary devices.